Hey everybody, welcome back to College Math. Today our topic of discussion is dialogue and the chaos game. The heck do those two things have to do with each other? We're about to find out. First, let's go on a review of what dialogue is. And for that, I'd like to thank my friends at Teaming Academy at Global for providing us with a nice summary of William Isaac's book on dialogue and the art of thinking together. In addition to this summary from William Isaac's books, I've overlaid the 4 principles that David Bohm speaks about in his book on dialogue in a different font. Okay, so the 4 principles of dialogue: voicing, listening, respecting, and suspending. Voicing is expressing oneself and one's feelings genuinely. And what that means is that every time we speak our voice, let's all promise each other that we will bring our authentic selves. We will straightforwardly speak what's really on our minds and actually bring that into the team company's dialogue. David Bohm describes voicing as the act of enfoldment. And if you read his book, he has this theory about these different orders, the implicit order and the explicit order of the natural universe. And the process of enfoldment is what allows us to bring from the implicit order and through our voice, allow that to emerge explicitly into the natural world. The next principle is listening, in which Isaac asks us to have no resistance and no forcing. And David Bohm matches the concept of listening with his concept of participation. That actually surprised me. I was really surprised to see David Bohm put participation next to listening rather than next to voicing, because it seems to me that when I'm saying something, that's how I'm participating. Ha, not so, not so. Remember that when we are sitting in team company dialogue, we must always be present and always actively listening. And so that's why David Bohm describes the process of listening as the true act of us participating. We are participating by opening our ears and opening our minds to what each other is saying. And that brings us naturally to our next point, which is respecting, acknowledging others' position. Not be able to understand each other's positions totally. We may be able to understand that there exists a greater whole of which each of us is a part. And that's why David Bohm matches respecting with his concept of coherence. And what he means by coherence is that we all acknowledge ourselves as components of the greater whole. And in that way, we start to feel coherent. We start to feel together, even when there's conflict. Even when two people bring opposing positions, they can practice the art of respecting each other and understand seemingly conflicting feelings or statements at the same time, because we're all part of this coherent whole. Finally, we're brought to the 4th principle of suspending. Suspending oneself from making conclusions, judgments, or opinions. And David Bohm matches this with his concept of awareness. So for awareness, that means that we start to become aware of our own mental models. The mental model that we each hold inside our head is how we view the world. That's how we understand things. And in the act of suspending during a dialogue, we're asked to take our own brain, our own mental model, start to become aware of it, and then take it out of our head and kind of place it inside the circle of dialogue, so that if we're all doing this, we can all see what's inside each of our heads, and we can all see that as part of a greater coherent whole. So let's try to stick to these principles of dialogue as we talk to each other in our team companies. All right, but I also promised you this thing called the chaos game, and so now let's go back to let's go over to the web and let's see what the chaos game is actually all about. For this, I'm going to show you a throwback from a PBS Nova special way back in 1989, in which a mathematician named Michael Barnsley will explain this fun little game to us.
I'm going to show you how to play the chaos game. It's very simple to play, but it has an extraordinary outcome. I begin with a big sheet of paper with 3 large points marked on it, labeled 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. Now what I do is I choose a point at random on the sheet of paper. I'll shut my eyes to do that, and now I'll just wiggle the pen around and dab a point. There it is. That's my starting point. So now what I do is I roll the die, and it comes up with a 4. So what I do is I go halfway from my first point to the big point labeled 3 and 4. I'll mark that new point. That's my new point. I roll the die. This time it comes up with a 5, so I go halfway from my new point to the big dot marked 5 and 6, and I mark that point on the piece of paper. Now, of course, if you do this, you should use a ruler and do things accurately. You need to play it for about 24 hours or longer, and you need to play very fast. And now I roll the die. Then this time it comes up with a 3, so I go halfway from my new point to the big dot marked 3, and that'll be about here.
Okay, not sure if I'm going to play that for 24 hours, but maybe I would if I knew that it was relevant to what I'm doing in the Changemaker Lab. So what the heck does that have to do with what we're doing here? For that, I have prepared this little PowerPoint to kind of tie in the chaos game with the analogy of a dialogue. So let's pretend that the 3 main points that Michael Barnsley laid out and labeled with numbers for his die are actually 3 people engaging in a dialogic conversation. Let's call these people Alex, Brooklyn, and Cam. Okay, so how is this going to go? What's going to happen inside this dialogue? Well, somebody's going to start somewhere. They're going to bring something to the table, and seemingly randomly, some sort of seed is going to be planted in the dialogue. That's the start. The process that we're going to follow is that we're going to take turns speaking. So let's say Cam speaks first. And as Cam speaks, the conversation as a whole starts to shift in the direction of whatever Cam said. And that's the move the point halfway to the corner that Michael Barnsley was talking about. Now, he was randomly selecting which corner to go to next using die. But in dialogue, maybe it's not so random. But a good thing to understand about the die is the die will result in the equal distribution of speaking time. So let's make sure in the dialogue that we're always including every single person, and we're not speaking too much, not taking up too much time, and we're not speaking too much either, which is to say that each person is contributing to the conversation. Okay, well, when that happens, let's say Brooklyn speaks next, then we are going to draw an arrow towards that corner, and then the dot is going to move halfway to there. Now, the dialogue is going to continue just like you saw Michael Barnsley continue his process, and this is what we call an iterative process. An iterative process is one in which we continue to apply the same function over and over and over again. In this term, our function that we're applying are the principles of dialogue. We are all practicing those principles the whole time, and we are taking turns speaking. So as long as we stick with the process, and I know sometimes it might get a little frustrating and a little bit hard, but remember, practice respecting, practice suspending, practice active listening, and continue to iterate that process. Each time a new member of the group speaks, they're not just speaking an independent thought that they've just been holding inside and not listening, waiting to blurt out. No, 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 no. In an iterative process, the output from the last round goes back into the function and becomes the input for the next round. And what that means in terms of our dialogue is that we're all practicing active listening the whole time, so that when it's our turn to voice and bring our authentic self through unfoldment, we are folding in everything that we've been actively listening to in the next time that we speak. Okay, so keep that in mind, is that as you speak, you should be speaking to the group in terms of what's been happening in the group. Sometimes people like to practice, when they're new to dialogue, repeating what the last person said before they speak their piece. And that showcases our respect, that showcases our active listening, and it ensures that we continue to iterate the process. Now, what's going to happen? Oops, sorry, I gave it away. What's going to happen if we continue to iterate the process? Well, I kind of gave it away. A fractal structure is going to emerge. But don't believe me. Let's go back to the web and show what happens as Michael Barnsley continues to iterate his process.
Now, of course, if you keep on doing this for a long time, what would you expect? You'd expect that you'd get an enormous mess of dots. But that's not what happens. Something very extraordinary and different happens.
Speed up the game on a computer, and this emerges. The chaos game has produced a complex and ordered geometrical structure. The revolutionary idea that a chaotic process can give rise to order is destroying old definitions of chaos we've clung to for centuries.
Truly amazing. I'm sorry, I kind of ruined it by clicking the punchline on the PowerPoint, but let's go back to there for a second and let's talk about that emergence. There's two key words that I would like you to stick with in today's mini lecture, and those two key words are iteration, which we talked about, continuing the process of dialogue so that we can iterate, and emergence. Iteration creates emergence. As long as we trust the process, as long as we maintain sticking to the process, eventually something will emerge. And like you heard on the video, this is actually new for math and science. It's been only about 50 or 60 years since mathematicians have realized that chaotic and even random processes, sufficiently iterated, can yield some sort of structure. That's what they call the creation of order out of chaos. Usually the structure that emerges has a fractal structure to it, and we can talk about that more later. Right now, the point is stick with the process, iterate it forward, and eventually something will emerge. The fractal structure that emerges is what Isaacs calls in his book on dialogue the order between. And in his chapter on suspending, he talks about this order between. And he asks us to suspend our individualism in favor of becoming advocates for the whole and seeking to find the order between, which includes all of our input together and is truly greater than the sum of each of us as individuals. This isn't just Alex, Brooklyn, and Cam's thoughts independently laid out. This is the evolutionary iterative process of the creation of something new and emergent by us practicing dialogue together. So here's the punchline. Practicing dialogue allows our collective ideas to emerge. Okay, that's the point. Now before I leave you today though, I'd like to show you another clip from that fun video, and I'm going to put that video up on the web. I'm going to put the link to this in case you want to watch it later. Later in that video, you'll meet this fun group of guys.
Acute insult from surgery, from open heart surgery, and she's going to be in and out of atrial fib. It's also hard to control her rate frequently when they're.
Oh, look at that.
Now she's back in sinus.
She's demonstrating just about every rhythm you could think of. In chronic cases, usually...
No self-respecting group of cardiologists these days seems replete without its resident nonlinear dynamicist. Here, it's Alan Garfinkel.
Start that up.
Now, why would I bring that up? Because I actually worked with those guys. Surprise, surprise. Here's a paper that I published about 10 years ago with two people in that video, Alan Garfinkel and James Weiss, at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine. I actually studied emergence and fractal structures and self-organization in the context of human heart cells. And together with physiologists, cardiologists, and nonlinear dynamicists, that's the key, we were able to further the world's understanding of how cardiac arrhythmias emerge from the subcellular level. We went from subcellular to cellular to tissue to whole heart level. And that's what we call bridging the gap between scales. Why would I bother telling you this right now? Because it all comes back to the Changemaker Lab. Sometimes it's hard for people to believe how much impact we can truly have by working together. But look at this. This is the Mondragon Team Academy's global network. A lot of these people are involved with a team academy. There are team academies popping up all over the world. How could we ever think that we could have an impact and make a positive change on the entire world? It's easy. They just use fractals. Because fractals are self-similar. Fractals bridge the gap between scales. And fractal structures emerge through iterative processes. So if we can all keep to the process, trust the process, and continue to practice the 4 principles of dialogue, I truly believe that we can scale up from the individual, project team, team company, changemaker lab, onto the international level, and we can make a really huge, lasting, positive change to the world. That's amazing, right? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you later.